Welcome to the First Unitarian Universalist congregation of Terre Haute. This congregation welcomes all people, regardless of their age, religion, race, nationality, ability, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, or anything else that has been used to divide people. We are a group of people with our own opinions, our own ideas, our own dreams. But we share ideals. We share a common belief in a liberal religion. In our discussions, we may disagree with each other, but we must always remember that what unites us is stronger than what separates us. We must always end the service aware of the love that we have for each other.
Today's Being You, we address the sixth principle, the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. The sixth principle seems extravagant in its hopefulness and improbable in its prospects. Can we continue to say we want world community, peace, liberty, and justice for all? The world is full of genocide, abuse, terror, and war. What have we gotten ourselves into? As naive or impossible as the sixth principle may seem, I'm not willing to give up on it. In face of our culture's apathy and fear, I want to imagine and help create a powerful vision of peace by peaceful means, liberty by liberatory means, justice by just means. I want us to believe and to live as if we believe that a world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all is possible. There is no guarantee that we will succeed, but I can assure you that we will improve ourselves and improve the world by trying. The words of Reverend Sean Parker Dennison, Tree of Life Congregation, McHenry, Illinois.
Forward, let us range. Let the great woods spring forever down the ringing grooves of change. Through the
Today's opening words are number 662. Strange and foolish walls. The years of all of us are short, our lives precarious.
Our days and nights go hurrying on, and there is scarcely time to do the little that we might.
Yet we find time for bitterness, for petty treason and evasion.
What can we do to stretch our hearts enough to lose their littleness?
Here we are, all of us, all upon this planet, bound together in a common destiny.
Living our lives between the briefness of the daylight and the dark.
Kindred in this, each lighted by the same precarious, flickering flame of life. How does it happen that we are not kindred in all things else?
How strange and foolish are these walls of separation that divide us.
The words of A. Powell Davies. Our opening hymn, number 148.
Let freedom span both east and west, and love both south and north, in universal fellowship throughout the whole wide earth. In beauty, wonder everywhere, let us communion find. Compassion be the golden cord, close binding humankind. Beyond all barriers of race, of color, caste, or creed, let us make friendship human worth, our common faith and deed. Then east and west will meet and share, and south shall bind with north, one human commonwealth of good throughout the whole wide earth.
Our transitional words today are number 709. Be the doers of the word and not merely hearers. Those who look into the perfect law, the law of liberty, and persevere, being not hearers who forget, but doers who act, they will be blessed in their doing. Today's speaker is Emma Crossen. Her topic is What's Next? Post-election reflections on moving home and moving forward. Emma grew up in Terre Haute and moved home 1 year ago, nearly after 2 decades in Kansas, Boston, Chicago, and Los Angeles. She has a Master of Divinity degree from Harvard Divinity School and graduated from Bethany College in Lindsborg, Kansas. Emma works at ISU as the fundraising officer for the College of Technology and lives on the east side of Terre Haute with her husband, Andy, and their daughters, Harriet and Virginia.
What can we do to stretch our hearts enough to lose their littleness? That's the question offered to us in this morning's opening reading. This week I heard an answer to that question. It was on an election debrief call with an organization called Hoosier Action. Hoosier Action does community organizing in rural and small towns in southern Indiana to build the political power of working people in our state. They envision a multiracial democracy that works for all Hoosiers. What can we do to stretch our hearts enough to lose their littleness? This election reminds us, they said, that the only rule is power. Power, it's the ability to influence behavior and outcomes. Power itself is neutral, we were reminded on that call. Power can be used for good or evil. But who has power and how they use it makes all of the difference. The election is a good reminder of that. The election bestowed more power on some, the winners, and revealed who didn't have power to affect the outcomes they wanted. For example, here in Terre Haute, the election gave power to a slate of Republican candidates, mostly, and revealed the weaknesses of our local and state Democratic Party structure, which did a poor job of turning out enough voters to even begin to counter the Trump wave. The election does not define us, but it does affect us, and it shows us some of our littleness. What can we do to stretch our hearts enough to lose their littleness? Well, I suggest that power is a good place to start. I moved home 1 year ago to Terre Haute with my husband Andy Howard, who is also from here, and our 2 young daughters, then 3-year-old Harriet and 8-month-old Virginia. We had been living in Los Angeles for the last 5 years, and Chicago before that, and Boston before that. We moved home to be near family. We moved home for a change, and I'd wanted to move home to Terre Haute for quite some time. I've lived in big cities, learned a lot from them, but I knew I'd be more inclined to do big things, to try to shed my littleness in the place I knew best, Terre Haute. For years I've wondered, probably like many of you, about some of Terre Haute's littleness. Why don't we have more? More good and different restaurants, for example. Why not a local bookstore? More live music, maybe a coffee shop downtown, which we do have now, again, thanks to federal. I've wondered, why are we spending $56 million on a bigger jail? Why don't we have more Black people in elected office? Why do we hear virtually nothing about our Latino community? Why is nearly a quarter of our kids living in poverty? We're not little people here. We're a city of educators, engineers, caregivers, innovators, laborers, craftspeople, researchers, entrepreneurs, and social workers. We're parents and children, friends and mentors, families of origin and families of choice. We're a city of actors and musicians, hunters and athletes, artists and writers. We're a city of exceptional institutions. We're home to the most diverse 4-year university in Indiana. We're the place where young people flock by the thousands every year to study and learn and dream. We're the city of St. Theodora and the Sisters of Providence, of First Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Terre Haute. We're a city of great organizations like Rethink, Vigo County Mutual Aid, and the new Pride Center, which I know has roots in this congregation. What can we do to stretch our hearts enough to lose their littleness? Well, in this post-election message, I'd like to suggest one possible answer. We can build more power behind our people, more political power behind our possibilities. Let's take, for example, one issue that I've been working quite a bit on, policing. Now, policing got a lot of attention across the country this year. Back in May, after the killing of George Floyd by police in Minneapolis, there were marches and protests, people pouring into the streets by the hundreds of thousands across this country. And here in Terre Haute, we saw that as well. There was a weekend at the end of May where we had several marches, and I was blown away by what I saw. So many people, hundreds of people pouring into the streets of Terre Haute, a really multiracial, multi-generational, cross-class gathering. I was stunned by the numbers and by what I saw at those events. I was deeply encouraged and wanted to do more of this work. And I met a couple of other local organizers, folks like me who had moved away for a time and moved back to Terre Haute, and we're all aspiring to figure out what this movement could look like here, what it means to say Black Lives Matter in Terre Haute. How do we bring it locally? What, particularly around race and policing here? How do we understand the problems and look towards solutions? Because there are problems in our policing here. And that's something we didn't hear enough about, even at those big marches when hundreds of people were saying Black Lives Matter. We haven't had a clear agenda that the public knows about and that we're rallying behind for what change could look like here and really what the problems are here. So, we wanted to do that work. And there are problems here. You sit in a room with Black folks in this town and talk about policing, and you'll hear stories. Watch Live PD, any number of episodes, and you can see what I would call police misconduct, police brutality, police assaulting families in some cases. And you can watch the headlines and see that there are rarely repercussions. Meanwhile, law enforcement in this community has quite a bit of political power. And let's face it, we're a city of cages. We have the federal prison here. We've been getting lots of attention recently for the executions that happen here. We're a city of a community of, an overcrowded county jail, the Wabash Valley Correctional Facility, the state prison that's notorious, our other county jails, our juvenile center. We need to do the work here. And there are many parts to this work. It starts with, we have to illuminate the problem, help people understand what the problems are with racism and policing in our community. We need to articulate solutions or alternatives. We need to cast a vision for what we want to see. What's the change that we want to see? And then we need to build a majority between activists and folks who are most impacted by the problems, between middle class and poor, white and black, mental health care providers and doctors and teachers and pastors and counselors and social workers and you name it. We need to get build the political majority of people who can get behind this agenda and help build political pressure with that. We need to recruit great candidates who can champion those solutions. And then we need to register and turn out voters to prove our power. So there's so much we could talk about here, right? But I just want to take a minute to focus a bit on relationships. Because as our reading today also said, how strange and foolish are these walls of separation that divide us? We said, what can we do to stretch our hearts to lose their littleness? But also, how strange and foolish are these walls of separation that divide us? But here's the thing. They're not actually walls. They're just habits and practices that have kept us from talking to certain people, from building relationships, from having the kinds of conversations where we really get to know each other and get to know what's at stake for us in issues of policing or homelessness or the environment. What's at stake for us as individuals? How do our stories intersect with these issues? What is it that we want? How are our dreams similar? How are our stories different? And how does this give us power, to shape a bold agenda and work to bring it to fruition? So they're not actually walls in most cases. They're just habits and practices and ways of communicating. And as I aspire to be a community organizer in Terre Haute, one of the things I've striven to do, that I've really focused on and try to make a practice for myself is, leaning into relationships and modeling new ways of being in relationship with other people in the community. And as the Reform movement, we did this in a way that was kind of interesting and illuminating for me. Back in June, we held a community talkback in Fairbanks Park, where we invited folks out in an evening. This was a few days after the marches. Invited folks out to hear from people in our community who had been impacted by racist policing. And as you might imagine, the crowd was mostly white folks sitting there, and most of the people speaking were people of color. And we knew that this wasn't going to be a space where everyone would feel comfortable coming out. This wasn't trying to be a comprehensive once-and-done event. But we wanted to give a space to hear some of those stories and to begin to imagine ways we could be communicating in this community, ways we could be in relationship, to just give a hint at how much we had to learn about each other, how much someone like me who hasn't had any direct interaction with racist policing in this community, what I have to learn from people who have, and how important it is to have those conversations. And we wanted to offer one version of what those conversations might be like. So that was a really powerful event that we did. And then much more recently, we started something new. It's a weekly gathering outside the jail. As we talked about, so many people in this community who are impacted by incarceration. But we didn't know of any groups that really existed to serve those who are impacted, whether it's families, whether it's folks who are coming out of jail, just folks trying to sort of navigate the system. We weren't sure of where to go to and who was serving this group of people. And so a few of us, including myself and a friend who has had a son in prison, we started talking about having this weekly gathering outside the jail. And we just defined it as a space for anyone in Terre Haute who's been impacted by incarceration to come, to be together, to share our stories, and to begin to think about how we can support each other and understand what our needs are, and begin to understand all the ways that incarceration impacts people in our community. And she invited a friend of hers who was a school counselor and had just retired, and so now she's coming to this gathering, and and through her, she opened my eyes to ways that incarceration impacts the kids in our schools. And she talked about having kids come who moved to Terre Haute because they had a parent in the federal prison. And so their entire family, uprooted and moved to Terre Haute so they could be in proximity to their loved one who's in the federal prison, and how that affects those kids. And she talked about all of the ways that having parents in and out of jail, impacts kids in our school system every day, whether it's the federal prison or the county jail. And I didn't know her before this, and I didn't know about the networks and all the ways that school counselors interact and share resources. And so now we're beginning to talk about, well, how could we connect with school counselors and learn more from them, and let them know that there's a group out here that really cares about this issue of incarceration and how much we have to learn from their wealth of knowledge and experience. And that all came from just organizing this gathering and showing up every week. And all we do is meet outside the jail and talk, and if anyone comes up, we welcome them in, and we share our stories. And that all came about just from having this event. One of the other people who came to that is a local activist who I'd been at multiple marches and other events with, but I didn't know until she showed up to this event. I didn't know that she had spent 4 years in prison. I didn't know her story. I didn't know what led to that for her, and now I do. And it was eye-opening to me because she's able to help me understand so much of what it's like to be in prison. And I understand so much more of her story, and can imagine new ways that we could work together, and new ways that I wouldn't have imagined if we hadn't had that conversation on a Thursday night, outside the county jail. And as I mentioned, we just show up and we talk, and we try to put it up on Facebook, and we've tried to spread the word through word of mouth. And the other thing that happens is while we're there, we get to see families coming in and out of the jail. And they often come in for a short amount of time because they're just going in to load some money onto their account or their loved one's account. And then that money the loved one can use to make video calls so that they can talk to them, or to buy a snack in the commissary, or in some cases to buy, I think sometimes they have to pay for certain forms of medical care while they're in jail. So these are, stories that we're learning because we're there, because we're showing up, and we're putting ourselves in a space where we get to interact with folks who have someone in the jail, and then we're interacting with each other and learning more about how this issue of incarceration intersects with our lives. And, we don't know how long we'll continue this weekly gathering. It was an experiment, but it certainly opened up specific concrete next steps that we can take, because for the last 6 weeks we've been, meeting outside the jail. So I share all this just to say this. I'm learning every day that there are so many ways we can relate to each other, so many things we have to learn about each other, so many ways we can better understand our problems and imagine solutions, and then set about building the power to achieve them. So what can we do to stretch our hearts enough to lose their littleness? Well, I offer to you today that we can do the work of building power. And power doesn't come from having the correct facts or the right ideas. It comes from having the right people and enough people by our side. And that's the work before us. So I'm so glad to be with you today, even if it's in this video format. We can do the work of building power by getting the right people and enough people by our side. And I'm so glad that we are here and ready to do that work. So thank you.
Here we have gathered side by side. Circle of kinship, come and step inside. May all who seek here find a kindly word. May all who speak here feel they have been heard. Sing now together this our heart's own song. But in the shadows, let us not forget. We who now gather know each other's pain. Kindness can heal us as we give, we gain. Sing now in friendship this our heart's own song.
Our closing words are number 637, which are responsorial. A litany of atonement. For remaining silent when a single voice would have made a difference.
We forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love.
For each time that our fears have made us rigid and inaccessible.
We forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love.
For each time that we have struck out in anger without just cause.
We forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love.
For each time that our greed has blinded us to the needs of others.
We forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love.
For the selflessness which sets us apart and alone.
We forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love.
For falling short of the admonitions of the Spirit.
We forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love.
For losing sight of our unity.
We forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love.
For those and for so many acts, both evident and subtle, which have fueled the illusion of separateness.
We forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love.
From Robert Eller Isaacs.